I'm trying to push a button. Today's presentation is the Local Emphasis Program, and to present that, we have Evelyn Partner from Utah Occupational Safety and Health. I've known Evelyn for a long time and have had some great experience. I've actually worked with her husband, who worked for Utah OSHA way back in the Olympic days, and she works with the Public Sector Consultation Group there at Utah OSHA, and her job is to help you be in compliance, and so we're really excited to have Evelyn here to talk about a new program that's coming up with Utah OSHA. I should have clicked that button just a little bit quicker. Did that work yet? Is that coming through, Doug?
No.
Let's try that one more time. Did you get a bubble now?
Okay. Yep. You see our screen now?
Now I've got your screen.
Okay. There we go.
All right. Sorry about the delay there. Evelyn, it's all yours.
Okay. So Jason asked me to come and present on a program that is actually not quite ready to roll out. This is a draft of the program. It's gone through review for our division and the Utah Labor Commission, so the commissioner has okayed it. They're actually meeting with the governor next week, and that will be the final review of this. After that, it will be rolled out. So this is what we're going to talk about today. LEP is Local Emphasis Program. That's an OSHA term because they have national emphasis programs too, NEPs. This is just for the state of Utah, and we're a state plan. We'll talk about that later. We're going to talk about the key points of this new public sector LEP and how it's going to work. So the effective dates on this, like I said, this is a draft that we're talking about today. We anticipate that it will be rolled out mid-November by the compliance group, UOSH compliance. By the way, UOSH is Utah Occupational Safety and Health. We no longer go by Utah OSHA, which is what's on my shirt. They're going to replace our shirts. They're going to say UOSH. And the reason we're going by that is that that's actually what we are called under Utah code. So we're going by our official name. This LEP will be reviewed at least annually by the compliance group. They may make changes depending on how things are going. The projected date for this to be in effect is at least until September 30th of 2022. They may renew it, depends a lot on how fast they get through the list, and we'll talk about that list in a minute. So I wanted to give you some background so you know where this is all coming from. Utah is a state plan state under federal OSHA. So OSHA, the OSH Act, in the federal side of it, was in 1970. There were several states in the country that already had an OSHA-like program, and right now about half the United States and territories are state plan states. So our state plan was awarded in 1985. UOSH is the name of our Utah state plan, and we are a division of the Utah Labor Commission. You may be familiar with some of the other divisions, such as the coal mine safety, industrial accidents, anti-discrimination in labor. So this LEP has to do with the public sector, or what we call local government employers in Utah. All local government employers are subject to UOSH enforcement of the general industry and construction standards. I've got general industry 1910 and construction 1926. Those are two separate books. So UOSH actually adopted these standards. Those are federal OSHA standards, and maybe that's where some of the confusion about who has jurisdiction here comes from. We did adopt those with a few small exceptions, and I wanted to point out there's right now 4 updated standards that federal OSHA has passed within the last year that we have not adopted yet, even though we usually have 6 months to adopt these. There's one of these that's really important to local governments, and that is the new record-keeping standard under federal OSHA. So federal OSHA has no jurisdiction over local governments in federal states or state plan states. And this new record-keeping standard you may have heard of wants you to submit your OSHA 300 forms and their 301, which is federal OSHA's first report of injury. We don't use that form in Utah. They want you to submit all this to a national database. Well, I'm here to tell you that particular part of the standard is being contested in court at the moment, so we've not adopted it. Even if it does go through, local governments are not going to be subject to it because federal OSHA has no jurisdiction over local governments, and so you do not have to comply with that. Don't submit your 300 form anywhere because Utah OSHA is not going to make you do that. UOSH. We have access to that information through industrial accidents, which is another division of the Labor Commission. So we don't need that database. We're not going to set up a database for Utah. Don't put your information in it if you're a local government. And that I've come to some local government agencies and they're like, whew, that's something I don't have to do, another piece of paperwork. So we're all for reducing paperwork. Anyway, back to the LEP. If you want to look at the OSHA 1910 and 1926 standards, a good place to do it is the OSHA Federal OSHA website. So I've got the website address there. If you want to see Utah codes, which are over and above the federal standards and they're more specialized, you can look at them through the Labor Commission website, and I've got that really long address there. They, like I said, are more specialized. Like if you have explosives that you're handling, there's a Utah code on explosives. Or if you have your own railroad system, then there's one there. Okay, so out of approximately 1,400,000 people that work in Utah, local government employees account for at least 15% or more than 200,000. So in the past, UOSH compliance inspections at local government employers have consistently represented a very small percentage of the total number of programmed inspections. So I started with UOSH in 2000 and I spent 8 years as a compliance officer. I can only remember a handful of local government inspections that I did as a compliance officer. So as an example, in 2016, only 1.8% of all of the inspections done by compliance were at local government employers. And all of these were the result of unprogrammed activities such as complaints, accidents, or referrals. So here's the history the last 3 years. Of course, we haven't finished 2017 yet quite, but you can see the total number of inspections of those, say in 2015, of 15 inspections, 8 of them were accident inspections. Unfortunately, 2 of those 8 were fatalities. I estimated 2016 on the number of accidents because they didn't actually give me that information, but it was probably about 8. And then 2017 so far, out of 13 inspections, 5 have been accidents. We've had 1 fatality so far in public sector. So the fatalities are really what brought this on the radar of the governor's office. And the governor's office actually requested UOSH to look into looking at public sector more often. And that's why this LEP is in place. So the goal of this LEP is to support basically the goal of UOSH, which is to make sure that the workers in Utah are protected from serious hazards, both physical and health hazards. So that's what they're going to look at on this LEP. So they're going to concentrate on workplaces that have the following hazards. And by the way, the most dangerous thing you're going to do at work in any workplace in the United States is drive on the road. That is by far, number one, the most dangerous thing that kills and hurts people in the workplace, any workplace. But if you discount that, the next 4 are falls, electrocution, caught in between, and struck by accidents. Falls lead it quite commandingly. And falls, we've had people in Utah die from falls from 4 to 6 feet. So it really depends on how you land and what you land on. But the general industry standard says you should be protecting people from falling when their feet are 4 feet or more off the ground or a lower level, and in construction it's 6 feet. The difference is the federal OSHA standard, people in construction had a better lobby, basically. So I would go with the more protective. Be at 4 feet even if you're in construction. Protect people from falling. So electrocution, it's amazing how many people get electrocuted with such small, what you would think of as low voltage. But when you look at it, if it goes through your body in the right direction, across your heart, you could be electrocuted with as little as 50 milliamps. So as an example, there's 15 amps available in most outlets. So you could be killed by a milliamp. 50 milliamps is, a milliamp is 1,000th of an amp. So that's a really small amount of electricity. Caught in between, I give an example there of machinery. Say, for instance, somebody's standing next to a loading dock and the forklift runs into them and they get squished. So that's an example. Struck by falling things, hitting people. We're not so good. Our head without a hard hat is not so good at protecting us from falling objects. Also, the other thing in this list is chemical substances. So chemicals in the workplace, anything that a person would work around. If you're in law enforcement, it might be drug exposures, bloodborne pathogen exposures for fire departments or things like that. They're going to be looking at all workplaces that have these and other serious hazards in the workplace. So who does this apply to? Public employers who are likely to have operations where workers may be exposed to serious hazards. This is just a partial list. There might be others. They're not likely to come and look at your library, or if you just have an office building, they probably won't be looking at your office building terribly close. But they're most definitely going to look at programs like utilities or water service or fleet service, things like that. You know, I had somebody the other day say, oh, you're looking at a golf course. What could possibly happen on the golf course? That's a really nice place to work and not very hazardous. Well, we actually had a death at a golf course here in Utah not too long ago where one of the employees tipped his mower over into the pond and got trapped under the water. So yeah, it's possible to have a serious injury or fatal accident even at a golf course. So this list is what is actually published in the LEP. You notice the last thing on the list says public, possibly others. So they may opt to look at other things. It's totally up to the compliance officer when they get there on site what they decide to look at. They do have the right to look at anything they want to. So here's a question we get a lot. Can an employer refuse entrance to a UOSH compliance officer? Absolutely. Employers have that right to do so. So you can exercise that right. But here's what happens with the compliance group if you exercise your right to refuse entry to them. So the first thing they usually do is call back to the office and say, hey, they've refused me entry. What do you want me to do? Depending on why they're there, they may wait around there on your site and while the people in the office do the legwork, or they may come back later. But essentially what happens is they go to a judge and ask for a judge's order to be able to get in. And I can't remember when one of these was denied because they are there on the public's goodwill. They, not just for that employer, but to make sure that all employers comply with OSHA standards. So I can't remember any time that one of their, if they had a reason to be there, one of their requests was denied. So all you will do is basically delay them. They'll get in. They'll come again. So when the UOSH compliance officers enter your workplace, they have the right to look at everything. they have the right to look at things immediately, although most compliance officers will give you a reasonable time frame to get somebody who's the boss. So I can remember, for instance, when I was in compliance, that I waited around for 20 minutes to half an hour for the boss to show up. Maybe he was off-site at lunch or something. Probably more than half an hour is really pushing it. And the reason they wait around is they want to see somebody who has the authority to make decisions, but also knows about the operation. They don't want to talk to just some flunky if they can help it, but they will talk to some sort of ranking employee if the boss isn't there, because they do have the right to search immediately or to look at things immediately. So the way that they're going to select people to do these inspections, this actually is a variant of how they now look at compliance construction sites. And it came from a court case that was brought to UOSH a couple of years ago when the construction company said, hey, you guys always look at my site because it happens to be along I-15 going out of Salt Lake City, and every compliance officer stops by because it's an obvious construction site. What about those guys back in the back countries who never get looked at, and yet they're doing just as bad of things? So now compliance has more of a lottery, I guess you could call it, to find out what compliance is going to look at as far as construction. So they've used that model for this. So one of the things they're going to do is go through these listed sources and go back 5 years looking for any serious or fatal work-related events. So I said earlier that UOSH does not need that national database for OSHA 300 forms and first report of injuries, and it's because we have access to the Utah Labor Commission Industrial Accidents Division, or IAD. Every workers' comp filing piece of paperwork that you fill out ends up in industrial accidents database, and we have access to that database on our computers because we're a sister agency. So we don't need any of those OSHA 300 forms filed in any kind of a database. That's why we don't. Anyway, so they will be looking at all of these things depending on what they're looking for. So one thing that's good to know is that if you get chosen and you're inspected by compliance, you then will have an exemption for 24 months, 2 years. So these establishments that have been comprehensively inspected will have an exemption for 24 years or 2 years, 24 months, depending on, you know, if this gets renewed, it may be going on for longer than 2022. Also, they will look back in our records in our office, and if they've already inspected you and you've had a comprehensive safety and health inspection within the prior 2 years, then they're not going to look at you again until it's been 24 months at least since you were inspected, as long as you have had no significant injuries during that same period. So they don't intend to have more than one LEP inspection during any 2-year period at any one employer. So that's just the scheduled LEP inspections. If you have complaints against you or accidents or have a referral, so people ask me, what's a referral? Referrals we usually get from another agency, such as a police department or fire department, or sometimes I went out on a referral when I was in compliance from the gas company one time. So it depends. The referrals are from other agencies. They don't necessarily have to be a government agency, but that's where those come from. So the LEP inspections will concentrate on that list I had earlier about high hazard. So UOSH will create a list of entities as their inspection pool, and they'll arrange them alphabetically. Then each entity is going to be given a number from 1 to however many entities they have in that particular inspection pool. And there's actually going to be several inspection pools. You'll find out in a little bit. They'll use a random number generator to pick these numbers from their pool for each cycle. So once an entity has been selected in a cycle for inspection, it'll be removed from that list of entities for the following cycle. So this will prevent you from being inspected more than once in a 2-year period. So once all the entities on each cycle have been inspected, so they will generate the numbers, come up with a list, then they'll go through the whole list. And once that whole list is gone through, then they'll do another random number generator for the next cycle until all of the list has been inspected. So there's one caveat to this. Some entities may be grouped with others if the one that was picked was way out in a remote part of the state, because we only have limited numbers of compliance officers. We only have 19, and they have to use their budget wisely. So if they're going to travel clear down to, say, for instance, Mexican Hat, they may pick up some other city on the way that's down there too, because that's, you know, only the best use of the tax dollars that run our division. So, you know, that's just how life is. So this is where their lists are going to come from. So municipalities, and they're talking towns, cities, and counties, with more 1,000 or more people. So that's one list. They will be picking 15 entities per cycle out of that list. Then there's public safety. They're going to include all public safety, police departments, fire departments, and correctional facilities. They'll be picking 15 entities out of that list for each cycle. Then they'll do education, and that means public school districts, all colleges, universities, and technical schools. These are, of course, public schools, not private schools. They'll pick 5 entities from that group per cycle. And then Utah State agencies, so divisions of agencies under the state of Utah, and special service districts like water and sewer, they'll get 15 entities per cycle from that group, with a total of 50 of all of those groups each cycle. So they'll be looking at 50 employers for each cycle, and they'll look at all 50, and then after they're looked at, they'll go back and pick more. So, like I said, you will still have maybe see compliance officers because of complaints, accidents, or referrals. This LEP has nothing to do with those. These are programmed inspections. So that's what we're talking about with the LEP. So if you've been inspected for the LEP, then you'll be removed from the list for selection for the next round cycle. So what do you do if your entity is chosen in a cycle? So here's what you do. You have an opening conference. You meet with management official. We skipped a slide, but I'll tell you what that slide said. We don't tell entities, compliance cannot tell you if you're on the list. You can't be told if you're in a cycle. The first time you'll find out that you are is when they show up on your doorstep. It's actually in our standard that says if a compliance officer makes any kind of contact with an employer before they go to inspect them, they could be fired. So they can't make appointments. They show up on your doorstep and say, here I am, ready to inspect you. So what an inspection consists of is opening conference, a walk-around inspection, and a closing conference. So in the opening conference, they meet with the management official, and this is where they might allow reasonable time for a management official to get there. If they can't get a management official, then they will take a ranking employee. They might have an opening conference over the phone later with the management official if the ranking employee doesn't have answers to all their questions. Then they do the walk around, and the COSHO, we call them COSHO, Compliance Safety and Health Officer, that's what COSHO means. They have the right to inspect all areas of the employer's location and all of their records that are related to safety and health. And the COSHO can be required to wear appropriate PPE by an employer. And there have been times where we've had COSHOs show up to an employer and the employer says, well, in order to come through our location, you need this and this and this for your PPE. And the COSHO didn't happen to have that. So they ended up going back to the office and getting some more PPE. We carry PPE with us anyway, but sometimes there's specialty stuff. I don't anticipate that public sector will have too much of that, but I can remember, for instance, needing an escape bottle of air to go onto the site of an employer. We don't normally carry that around. But anyway, our division, UOSH, supplies PPE for COSHOs. The employers do not have to supply that to a COSHO. And COSHOs will not go into places that require SCBAs. So they're not going to be accompanying the fire department, for instance, on a call where they're running in and out of a burning building. That's actually forbidden in our directives for our department. So they might review programs, and that means written programs like bloodborne pathogens, hazard communication, whatever kind of programs is appropriate for that particular employer. They also may do some industrial hygiene sampling if they have suspected health hazards and the employer hasn't done it already. So those are things that are typical of a walk around. Then they have a closing conference, and they usually go over the hazards they found in a closing conference. And then they issue a report of findings. And the report may or may not have citations attached. Depends on if they found any hazards. So the one thing about public sector employers that's a bit different than private sector employers as far as compliance goes is that public sector employers are not assessed fines. But that doesn't mean that they get off scot-free. They have to abate the hazards that were cited by the due date in order to avoid further action. And what is further action? If the thing is not abated during the due date, you may end up getting letters from upstairs in our building, which is the Attorney General's office. And I have heard that they've been pushing some of those recalcitrant employers, private employers, up to the Attorney General's office for further action. So all compliance office inspections are part of public record, and they can be searched on the federal OSHA website. So if you go to that website listed there and you look for establishment search, you can actually search any employer in the United States, and the parameters on there, you can actually search back to 1971. So you can go back and see if an employer has ever been cited by OSHA, and you can see what they were cited for, what their citation amount was if they're a private employer. And actually, there are a lot of companies that use this tool as a screening tool for subcontractors that they hire. And it's pretty useful, actually. I would tell people, though, just because you have one citation from OSHA, that doesn't mean you're a bad company. I would be looking for a pattern. If you've got several citations, there's an issue. So, you know, one is everybody can screw up once, at least. So I wouldn't hold that against people. And we only usually go back 3 years when we're looking at things as far as history. So another thing about compliance citations is they are grammar requestable. Anybody can write our office and say, hey, I want a copy of that report that you went out and did an inspection at thus and such employer. And we have to give it to them. We charge them a little handling fee so we can make a copy, but it's subject to grammar request. So what's the solution to this? And here's my plug for consultation. If you haven't worked with consultation before, here's your chance. So most people don't know that UOSH has a second side. There's the compliance side, and that's what everybody thinks of when they say OSHA or UOSH. However, there's the consultation group. And that's who I work for now, and I've been working primarily with public sector for the last 9 years all over the state. Consultation, it's free. All you have to do is ask. We get you on the schedule. It's confidential. It help for you to solve recognized hazards before people are injured or made ill, and hopefully before compliance shows up and cites you for it. It's also help writing programs. We answer questions all the time, just on a daily basis, and I've worked with people and they've called me many times after I've worked with them saying, hey, I've got this situation. How does OSHA standard deal with this situation? Because, you know, there's a lot of gray areas, and if you've ever read OSHA codes, some of those codes, they use really vague words like adequate. So sometimes people ask us, how do we interpret this? How good is good? And so that's one of the things we do on a daily basis in our office. Also, if you're working with UOSH consultation, you have access to some free educational services through our office. And if you're working with UOSH consultation, we give you a letter that tells anyone asking that you're working with us. So if compliance shows up and you show them the letter, they say, okay, thank you very much, and they leave. And then after you have done a complete comprehensive inspection, or we call them visits, compliance does inspections, consultation does visits. If we have done a complete consultation visit with you, then you will get a letter that exempts you from their LEP for 2 years. So you've already had a visit, basically, by consultation. Compliance considers that adequate for the LEP, so they will just put you in the already done file for 2 years. So another advantage with consultation is that what we do never becomes part of public record or subject to grandma requests. Our files are totally confidential, and we have had compliance officers come over and say, hey, can I look at your file for some company or even public sector groups? And no, they can't. Even though we are in the same office, compliance officers cannot look at our files. They're totally confidential. So unless you tell compliance that you're working with us on most of our work, they don't know that you've worked with us. I've had compliance officers come over to me and say, hey, I just worked with this city and they need lots of help. You need to go work with this city. And so we hear from them about public sector that needs help, and occasionally I'll go out and outreach to them and say, hey, you know, we want me to come help you. But we do not tell them in the other direction. And so this particular LEP is a little bit of a departure from that, because obviously the compliance group needs to know that we have worked with a public sector group in order for them to put the public sector employer on their already done list. So we will ask you at the end of the visit, do you want us to let compliance know that we worked with you and get you on their finished list? So here's how to get hold of public sector consultation. You can call the office, Consultation and Education Service section. And if you have any questions for interpretation of standards or things like that, this is a good number to call, because even though I've given you my information, I'm not always at the office. I don't answer my phone while I'm driving, because I don't like to answer my phone while I'm driving, and it's against UOSH policy. I also don't answer my phone when I'm out working with people or teaching classes, those kinds of things. So I have periods where you really can't get hold of me. I do answer email. I answer voicemail. My phone that's listed there is a cell phone. You can even text me. The phone that's listed with Consultation and Education Service section is an actual office phone, so you can't text that number. But the consultation program email there, you can email, and you can also go on to our website and request a consultation visit through the website, or you can send them an email. Or you can send me an email, say, hey, I need to schedule a visit. So there have been a number of public sector people who have heard about this LEP through the grapevine recently and called me and scheduled visits. So to give you an idea, right now I'm scheduling visits in January. My calendar is getting full. So we do it on a first come, first served basis. If I'm too far out, then we can schedule it with another consultant, and that works too. We all work together. So that's pretty much all I have for my presentation.
Great, Evelyn. Thank you so much for enlightening us on this LEP. I know a lot of people have been curious about it. I've had several people say that you visited and said, "Hey, nudge, nudge. It'd be great if you got involved with this." And it's a good program there. You know, this is something that we can work in tandem with UOSH. If you and I should point out, if you have questions, go ahead and type those into the chat box so we can get those in before we wrap up. But we can work in tandem there. Most people, when they ask about the consultation program, my recommendation is have Doug, Brent, or myself come in and do a risk assessment to start with, and we can take care of some of the low-hanging fruit there, and then bring Evelyn in and get that protection from having a consultation visit. And so it's a good opportunity for us to help be in compliance, but at the end of the day, get people make sure our people are safe. Just checking here to see if we've got any questions. I have one question. What is the cycle? You talked about cycle. How long is a cycle?
So that will depend on how long it takes compliance to get through their list of 50 people that they choose for that cycle. And it's really hard to predict that because, you know, this is a random generated list. So maybe in one list, they generate, you know, several big places like maybe Salt Lake City and Provo and Ogden are all coincidentally in the same list. So it's obviously going to take them a lot longer to get through 3 big cities than to, you know, maybe get through something like POF, for instance. So it really depends on how many people are large in that particular cycle. So the cycle will consist of 50 employers, 50, and however long it takes them to get through those employers is how long that cycle will be. Once they finish all the employers in the list, so 50 employers, then they will go and generate another cycle.
Okay.
And so it's really hard to predict how long that cycle will last.
Okay, great. Another question: if we have multiple locations, will the inspections take place at each location?
So, for instance, if you're a city with a public works department and a sewer department, and one city I know of has a natural gas department. So if you're a city that has multiple departments like that, and they're all in different locations, then yes, they will look at all of those different locations. I'm not sure if, for instance, a city comes up in the city list, if they will also look at their fire department and police department at the same time. I mean, it would be logical that if you're there anyway, that you'd look at the fire department and police department for that city. But the way they've got it set up, those are in a separate list. The municipalities in one list, and the fire departments, police departments, correctional places are in another list. So I'm not exactly sure if they're going to try to coordinate those, or if they'll come back and do the fire and police department. Exactly how they're going to work that, I'm not exactly sure. But they will be looking at all of the separate departments. Like I said, they probably won't look at libraries or city office buildings where they're just doing clerical work, because those are not considered hazardous occupancies. So another one that would be in that probably not going to look at list would be the senior center. If you have a city that runs a senior center that serves maybe lunch during the day. If it's a full care senior center, so the people actually live there, they probably would look at that.
Okay. All right. Question regarding counties. We have municipalities shown on there. It looks like in the details it says counties. Are counties included in this list as well?
Yeah, they put them in what they consider municipalities. They group counties and cities and towns in the same list. Don't know why exactly, because they are kind of different, but that's just how they organized it.
All right. Very good. Doug, I sent you a text. I don't know if you got that or not. Is there any way you could put Evelyn's contact information back up on the screen? Did you call that?
Yeah, I did.
I might be able to do that really quick. Hold on. I'll take the ball and I'll put that back up on the screen. You getting it? Okay, great. All right. I'm just checking to see if we've got any other questions. It looks like we've about satisfied the questions. Okay. For those of you that are interested in Evelyn's contact information, it's there. And once again, we're recording the session, so you can go back and review this and see if there's anything that you missed there. We really appreciate Evelyn and her taking time to come in and give us a heads up on this program, so we really know what's coming, and so we can participate and be ready. You know, I've been through a number of OSHA and other regulatory agency inspections throughout my career, and some of them were good and some of them were not so good. And the ones that were good were the ones where I was prepared and had my ducks in a row, and it went really well. It works for the employer as well as the compliance officer as well. If we have our materials together, that definitely makes the inspection go better. And I'm here to tell you, if a compliance inspector walks in and you have your ducks in a row, the inspection is going to go better. If they get the feeling that this employer knows what they're doing, they're probably not going to be looking at the minute details that they might be otherwise. And that's been
You're definitely correct. And also, there's a misunderstanding. I'm not advocating that you're mean to compliance officers, but there are people out there that think that, you know, if you're mean and nasty to the compliance officer, they're going to get you. Well, they have to get the report and any citations on the report through 2 levels of review back in the office. So, you know, even if they had a bad day and they're frustrated or whatever, they're not going to be able to, you know, come down on you because they feel like it. It has to comply with the requirements under the compliance side of the office. And they may sit down with you at the closing conference and say, okay, here's the citations that I am going to recommend issuing. They got back to the office, and they do use video cameras. Sometimes the compliance supervisors and managers say, hey, wait a minute, what about this? That's on your video. How come you didn't address that? And so sometimes you end up with more citations than the compliance officer said, and sometimes less, because the compliance officer might think something is a problem. It gets back to the office and they say, no, that's okay, we're not going to issue a citation on that. So there is a review that all of those reports go through, and they try really hard to enforce the law uniformly across the board. And I think they're doing a pretty good job of it now.
Okay, great. And just a reminder that we will be doing a webinar next month on how to prepare for an OSHA inspection. So that'll be our loss prevention webinar. Here are some things that I've learned and we've learned in the folks in loss prevention over the years that are good best practices to help you be prepared for any type of regulatory inspection. Compliance is important, but at the end of the day, it really comes down to the safety of the people that we're working with, and that's our ultimate goal, is to keep them safe. Okay, doesn't look like we've got any more questions. Final word, Evelyn.
I'm just hoping that everybody's having a great day and keeping everybody safe, because that is our ultimate goal. That's why I moved over to consultation. I feel like being proactive is a better position to be in when it comes to safety and health, because I've been at the serious injury and death investigations, and they're always heartbreaking. There's always something. If they've only been doing this one thing that's in the OSH standard, they would still be alive. And I hated doing that. I would much rather prevent that, because there's no way to put the pieces back together sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much, Evelyn. We appreciate it. Appreciate everybody's attendance. If you have any questions, please contact us or give Evelyn a call, and we're happy to help out wherever we can. Everybody go out and have a safe day.
Thanks.